Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Burlington. It is a pleasure to have you join us on this, our 58th edition of Burlington and Beyond. In our efforts to bring some of the key people in the Burlington government to you, to hear about them, to find out what is going on in town and about their jobs and whatnot. We are graced tonight with a visit by Dan Grattan, current selectman. There is a rumor, I think, that Dan is going to be leaving after having been a very active selectman. And so he's here with us tonight, and we're going to be talking to him. And Larry, I have to mention my partner here, and we're going to ask Dan a whole bunch of questions. Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
I'd like to have you talk a little bit about yourself, what
Sure.
what you've been doing, your family, your schooling, whatever comes to mind. Tell us a little bit about Dan.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I got involved in local government the way a lot of people do. Is I actually started with my kids in schools. When we were first living here, we were living over in the Pine Hill School District area, if you will, and we decided we'd been looking for a slightly larger house. We were sort of outgrowing the one we were in. At about the time we bought our current house, started hearing about new construction going on at the Memorial School, and we're going to be moving into the Memorial District at the time. So I went to some public meeting where they were talking about it. Couldn't keep my mouth shut, asked a few questions, and found out that they were then going to have a public building committee meeting. So a couple weeks later, I go to a public meeting of the building committee, and I'm sitting in the back, and I'm just kind of listening. And then Christine Monaco, who was on the committee at the time, right, asked me to come up and sit at the table. 12, 13 years later, here I am. Right?
The rest is history.
That's how it all came about. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, it's been great. We have, my three kids have gone through, or one of my three kids has gone through the school system. She's in college now. The other two are still in it. But we love it here in Burlington. It's been good.
Mm-hmm.
So.
When were you first elected to the Board of Selectmen?
6 years ago, so 2011. Ran for re-election once. Basically I was asked to run. I hadn't really considered it. I'd been in town meeting for 7 years at that point. And going back to the schools, I had always thought that if I ran for townwide office, it would probably be more, being for schools.
What were the issues when you first ran for selectmen?
What were the issues?
Was the school part of it?
It wasn't. Although one of the reasons a couple people suggested I run was because they needed somebody on the board who had worked with the school, members of the school committee, and were familiar with the schools a bit. I wasn't the only one, but who had somebody in school at the time. But there was that. Development, redevelopment were big at the time. Up to that point, I had been on capital budget, so there were a lot of capital budget issues that were facing us. Pat, you learn a lot about things you never thought you'd learn about.
Yes.
I'm an electrical engineer by training, but I had actually started out in civil engineering and changed after one semester of college. But by virtue of being on capital budget, I learned more about water distribution systems and sewer systems and a few other things than I thought I would ever know. So, so it was those types of issues. The development was big.
What were we developing at the time?
Let's see. 2011, we had some PDDs that had been approved and were in development, right? Plus some others that were facing us. Now, the Board of Selectmen doesn't get involved directly in zoning in PDDs, but we will weigh in occasionally because once development is finished, right, it lands back in the lap of the other departments, right? Planning board, is involved in all the planning and approvals, but once everything's finished, it becomes part of the town, right?
How long have you lived in town?
Since 1998. So,
okay.
So in 2011, that was what, I'd been here 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was quite the newcomer even after 13 years, right?
tell us about your experience with the Board of Selectmen. You learned a lot.
Yeah.
You got a good start in capital budget. I'm glad you said that you were in capital budget, because I don't know, that maybe in a couple of years I might decide to run for. No, I'm just kidding. Did you enjoy
Go for
it?
it. I did. It was deciding not to run for re-election was a very difficult decision.
Really?
I really enjoy it. I'm passionate about local government, but things have changed in 6 years, and now is not a good time for me to be trying to carry on with that. So, some of the issues, some of the more near-term issues are things that we had to deal with right away. When I got elected in April, that August, I got a phone call from somebody saying that the email server was down. All right, Dan, you're an IT guy. I'm not really. I write software, but I'm actually an IT person. Could you please look into it? Okay. So that started a process where we put together a committee and sort of came up with a plan for how to manage IT townwide, and that's culminated in the the department that we have now that we share with the school committee. But, so it was just one of those things where a number of technical issues and management issues came to a head, and the time was ripe to make some changes.
That IT development is certainly well underway in town now. We had Amy on not too long ago, and she was telling us about how they were going to put those components together that were approved by town meeting. That's going to be very, very interesting.
Yep.
I don't know where to begin. I have a lot of different things that I'd like to talk about. For example, just to begin, and then I'll let you. Where do you, from what you know currently with regard to the 19 and a half complex, is that now, I see them working, I think yesterday or today.
I believe the site plan has been approved. All right, coming back to not being in as deeply as I'd like, I don't know exactly where it is with the planning board right now. Okay. My understanding, it's all approved.
They did approve.
They did approve it, right? So, so now it'll be going through the construction process, and that's more with the building inspector now, right? That's back to the selectman department, but we don't get involved directly in that sort of thing. So,
Larry.
And why is it that you're leaving? Were there issues with the direction of the Board of Selectmen, or are they strictly personal reasons?
It's strictly personal reasons. Yeah, when I ran 6 years ago, my kids were younger, and I had a little bit more flexibility, surprisingly, when they were younger than the current age. And I changed jobs, so I have a little, less flexibility. My current job's more demanding, so just slightly higher demands on the home front and the work front than 6 years ago. So just enough so that I can't meet it all, and don't really feel like I'd be able to do the job the way it needs to be done. So
basically, family commitments.
Yep, spend more time with my family, as the cliche goes, right? But that's really what it's about. Yeah.
Dan, looking back at your terms as a member of the Board of Selectmen, is there anything in particular that stands out that you, someone, you might be talking to a member of the family or someone, and is there something that comes to mind that you really feel good about? And would it touch upon the open space?
Well,
is that
it would, as a matter of fact, yeah.
Okay.
There are two things, as a matter of fact. And the first one, I find this story amusing, so please bear with me. But I was at a Halloween party, kids party, with friends, and this is after I'm on the Board of Selectmen. I happen to be on the subcommittee for the landlocked parcel. And I'm talking with some friends and standing there having a drink, and the kids are running around. And one of the moms comes up to the group of three or four of us who are talking, and says to the host, and those of us who are standing there, I was hiking in the landlocked forest the other day, and this guy comes out, and he's wearing fatigues, and he's carrying a bow and arrow, and he was hunting. He says, he really scared me. It's like, what is going on? They can't allow hunting on the landlocked forest, can they? And so my friend, the host, sort of turns to me and says, Dan, how'd you like to take this one? Anyway, to make a long story monotonous, as my mother used to say. Sort of took her input, then, and of course my initial reaction was, oh yeah, you're right, we can't have people over there, that wouldn't be safe, right?
Sure.
But then I started talking to a few other people, including Ralph Patuto at the time, right? He says, no, people have been hunting there for years. Well, we eventually figured out that it's not conservation land, so hunting would be allowed, but it has to be specifically granted by the governing body. So in this case, it was the Board of Selectmen. So this was one of the more fun things I worked on, right? I got a number of different constituents, some people who were in favor of hunting, some who were opposed to it, right? Got everybody together, got everybody in a room. Joe Morandi, who's on the Board of Selectmen now, was on the committee that we put together, right? Okay. Along with Rich Bagney, and he provided a lot of the expertise around how to put these types of programs together because he had done it with, let's say, Andover, right, on some of their land. So we came up with a program that sort of met everybody's needs, right, and came up with a licensing program for the bow and arrow hunting during the bow season in the fall. So that was one of the more fun things and one of the more rewarding things I got to work on. It's helped sort of broaden the constituency, if you will, of users of landlocked forest, right? You know, the Friends of the Landlocked Forest, which is, you know, a non-government group, right? It's a not-for-profit group that's sort of dedicated itself to preserving the landlocked forest. Has done a lot of work over there, and they helped with this process. That was, what, 4 or 5 years ago now? Yeah. So there was that, and then the other thing, there was the IT that I talked about earlier, right? And then the other thing is the audit subcommittee. We got the audit report, and it was probably my second or third year in, so I'd seen these audit reports before, but we just sort of, they were getting kind of glossed over, right? And for whatever reason, we were going to be going over it that night. I picked up the management letter, right? The management letter is sort of it's the document that the auditors provide that provides everything in sort of a language that most people can understand, right? Okay. As opposed to all the auditing and financial information. And I started reading it, and it's like, there are a lot of issues here that we need to deal with, some of which were kind of old, right? And so I made the case to the rest of the board to create an audit subcommittee and start, you know, trying to whittle down some of these issues. So the audit or the management letter has gone from, I don't know, somewhere around 20 pages down to about 4. You know, there's all these issues we've gotten cleaned up, and in the meantime, our town accountant and the financial team have gotten awards from various committees for the work they've done as well. So that was a nice turnaround, yeah. But but that was, we just provided the drive, if you will. But it was really Paul Sagarino, Brian Curtin, Craig Robinson, the financial team that really got their teams together to do all this work.
Would you venture an evaluation of, an assessment of some of the people that you just mentioned? But how do we stand in terms? I'm sure you've had some insight with regard to how we fare with other towns around in terms of our government. And do you think that what we're, the Board of Selectmen and whatnot, is it the best kind of government for our town yet? I guess what I'm asking is, what do you see down the road for Burlington?
I don't give short answers, so here we go. I think it is the best form of government, is the short answer. When I talked about when I first moved here and being the newcomer, our first election cycle must have been the spring of 1999 when we were living here. And I came from a similar town that had gone from rural to suburban back in the late 60s and early 70s, but not as much commercial development as Burlington. But I remember driving around town and seeing, the election signs starting to pop up. And the thing that really struck me was, so-and-so for the Board of Selectmen. I can't tell you who was running in 1999. But my initial reaction was, how 17th century, right, selectmen, right? The town I came from, upstate New York, so it's a different municipal governmental structure, was town council as opposed to selectmen, right? And there's no notion of a town meeting, right?
Okay.
And I think what is huge here and is important, and I want to see it stay this way, quite frankly, is you have a separate legislative body and executive body. And that's really the distinction between a town and a city in Massachusetts, right? In a city, you have an elected mayor and you have a city council, right? And they serve as both the executive and legislative bodies of the municipality, right? Yeah. Here are the separate bodies, and I think I think that's very important. Yeah. So,
very good. You, okay, looking at the master plan,
Mhm.
or just an assessment of it, have we gained some insight with regard to where Burlington is going, at least insofar as you know it? I'm sure you've been involved with the master plan to some extent. I know it's good, and I know it's mandatory. Is it, have we done a good job with it this time?
So that's, I
That
have
may
been
be kinda
involved with
hard
it, but not as involved as I would have liked, quite frankly. And on the rare occasions that I showed up for the meetings, I usually took a little bit of beating for it. But I think it has been helpful because, at the very least, it gets town officials asking residents, very pointed questions about where do you want to see how do you want to see the town develop, right? And it's really about when it comes down to it, it's zoning, infrastructure, lifestyle, right? It's not really about
Right,
governance,
right.
right? And if nothing else, a lot of people, residents, right? In addition to I'll say the usual collection of elected officials
Sure.
and activists, right? You get a lot more input from a lot more people, is what I'm trying to say. So it's been helpful in that regard, because everybody who sits in office, whether it's elected or appointed, we all like to think that we know what everybody wants, but no doubt we miss things, right? So it served that purpose, right? Really to help people, help the government really understand what people's priorities are, right? And then it provides a framework for how to get there, right?
Yeah.
It's not really going to provide detailed implementation or lay down a proposed set of zoning laws, but it's a framework, and it helps set priorities. So.
I was, Larry, go ahead.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Just let me know when it's my turn.
No, go right ahead. I'm sorry. I've got so many things I want to ask you. Your turn. Go.
Okay, thanks. You like the form of government that we have now. There has been some talk about turning it into a mayor situation,
Right.
city situation. And do you feel that the majority of the selectmen would be against that at this point, too?
I don't have a sense of that.
It's not something that's come up.
It's something that hasn't really come up for discussion. So I don't know.
One of the things that's been of concern to me, it seems like there's been a growing rift between town meeting and the selectmen.
Mm-hmm.
I think the part-time elected officials' health care was one such issue.
Okay.
What could be done to allow the two
Sure.
sides to talk more, discuss the issues more? Because I remember when we, as town meeting members, went up to the Board of Selectmen, we were shut off by one of the selectmen. Weren't allowed to talk.
Right. So.
What happened there? I mean, wouldn't that have been a good chance to hear each other?
So that was when the motion was made to change the policy, right? At the time, Mike Runyon was chair. He couldn't get anybody else to make the motion, right? And so he made the motion himself. I think even if I'm not mistaken, I think even before he made that motion, he said he wasn't going to recognize anybody from the public on the issue. But he didn't really explain himself at that time. And a member of the audience said that this is a public meeting; we should be allowed to speak. And I was actually the one who corrected said person, because the said person was actually a former selectman himself. Okay. And at the time, he and I were actually on the same side of the issue, oddly enough, right? But I'm like, it's not a public hearing, and it's at the discretion of the chair. So 2 or 3 people were trying to make the point that, it's a public meeting, therefore they must be heard. Mm-hmm. It's one of these little nuances, right? That it's really at the discretion of the chair, right? Mike went on to explain himself at the next meeting as to why he didn't allow public input. What had happened, and what he described at that time, was that he had gotten a couple phone calls from people over the weekend leading up to that meeting, right, saying that they would like to discuss it, and he basically what he said was that he got back to them later in the weekend, right? Like, he wanted time to think about it. And he said, no, I'm not going to take any input, largely because so far nobody has really had anything new to say, right? Everything that he was hearing and being told was basically repeating everything that had been said at the prior town meeting when the non-binding resolution had been discussed and voted on, right? So that was the rationale, right? So then he gets to the meeting, right? And there are other people in addition to the people that he had spoken to on the phone who also wanted to speak. Well, then he wasn't comfortable, all right, allowing those people to speak when he'd already told other people that they couldn't, and they weren't in the room, right? So that was the other part of the problem, right? So he didn't want to, give somebody, some people a chance to speak on it when he'd already told others that there would not be an opportunity. So that's kind of how that played out the way it did. Now as to how that all could have been done differently, clearly there was a difference of opinion at the time, right, between the majority of town meeting and the majority of the Board of Selectmen, right? And it's just the discussion was mostly civil, right? It got rancorous at times. I actually missed the January town meeting where the non-binding resolution was passed. I had a prior work commitment that night that I had to be at. So that particular issue, in the public forums, I don't think things could have gone all that much differently, right? Short of one side convincing the other, right? I mean, but the majorities were pretty well entrenched on either side at the time. That was over a year ago now. So,
Well, just to go into it a little bit more.
Sure.
At that time, your administrator came before town meeting and said this was a serious problem, the cost of health care, as well as OPEB and other things. And so when you say something's a serious problem, well, that starts legislatures' minds going, well,
Sure.
what can we do about it? What can we do about it? And that's one way we could reduce the cost. It was in line with what other towns have been doing.
Sure.
So I don't think we even came away with the Board of Selectmen's reasoning as to why they wanted to continue.
Sure.
Something that was being told to us is becoming unaffordable. So to get the opinion of the board would have probably been helpful, would have been a good start. It sounds like that evening was some technical reasons from what you were saying, that he told some people no, so they didn't show up, so you
Right,
can't tell
right.
other people yes at this point.
Right.
But he could say, well, next meeting we can put that on the agenda. And that's a
Right.
suggestion, the example,
Right.
ways to,
Yeah.
But-
And
but that was done.
yeah, it was. I mean, part of it was clear, at least at that point. Again, we're going back a year now, right? That the board had already made up its mind, right? And so the board wasn't inclined to bring something up for debate that had already been decided on by the board, right? The board had already reached its decision, right? And so it wasn't going to reopen the debate, a couple weeks later. I mean, that's really what it came down to. So,
Okay.
right, it's
One of those ongoing issues.
doesn't mean it won't come up again, right? So.
Hang on, Pat.
Go ahead.
There appear to be in the last 6 to 8 years some very big proposals that have changed this town. The district, Third Ave. But I suppose that was mostly planning.
Sure.
Seems like they still would have had to have some support too. In your feeling, do you feel we have been overdeveloped at this point? Based on the resources, based on the town we were?
Well,
I'm coming from a standpoint of having moved from Waltham to get out of the city
okay.
to a nice, quiet little town that's still active enough.
Okay. So
But
the
then, boom,
yeah, well, I guess
center overlay,
yeah,
Third Ave.
yeah. There's
More
there
malls.
were sort of two questions there, right? One was resources versus where we came from, right?
Two issues, you're right.
Right. So Burlington, right, for me, all right, has been this way for as long as I've been here, right? It's, since '98, right?
I'm here in 2001, so
Okay.
But there were dramatic periods of change during that time frame.
I guess I don't.
There was no Shaw's at the time. That store had been empty for years.
Let's see. There was no, yeah, what was there before Shaw's?
It was
Oh, Almy, there was an, Almies, was that the name of the department store? It's a now
Yes,
defunct department
yes.
store, Almies, right?
it
Yeah,
was empty for a while.
It was empty for a while,
For
yeah.
a few years. I think.
yeah. So, do I think it's overdeveloped? In terms of, available resources, I don't think it's overdeveloped. Partly because the development itself brings an infusion of resource development. The best example of that is, when we add sewer, I don't want to say add sewer capacity, when we add sewer usage, okay, builders actually have to remediate more than they take. Okay, so that actually turns out to be a win. Most development also brings with it improvements in infrastructure, like surrounding streets and so forth, right? And there's the improved tax base. Yes, that also brings increased expenses to go with it. But for people who lament, if you will, that Burlington is no longer sort of the rural, pristine town that it once was. I don't know what to say about that, right? This is the way it has developed over time. The people who came long before you and I. You said you've been here since 2001, right?
Mm.
I mean, so how long have you been here, Pat?
Since 1961.
61. Okay. So, at the very least, people did a good job of sort of laying out the town and at least making a reasonable attempt at separating the
Yes.
commercial and retail from the residential, right? It's not perfect, right? There are some neighborhoods that do still suffer a lot from their proximity to the business district, but we do have a legacy we have to protect at the same time, and that's when I think about the future of Burlington, right? And even coming into office, going back to when I was involved in town meeting, I mean, even before I was on the Board of Selectmen, there's this legacy. We've been handed a gift, right? And we have to make sure that we take good care of it, right? To the best of our ability and the best of our judgment, right? As we have to make decisions. So, I'm not sure I answered your question, but
I think the best you could.
yeah,
I think.
yeah.
What I'm noticing though is that even though we have all this additional business,
Mm-hmm.
taxes continue to rise,
Mhm.
rise. So we're doing something with that money. Do you believe we're being good stewards of that money, additional monies from the business concerns that we've accepted
Sure.
into the town?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there's waste. I think that there are a lot of programs. Burlington is able to do more than a lot of other towns are because of the resources that we have. In John Petrin's first meeting after he joined as town administrator, and we were doing the annual meeting where we were setting budget guidelines, he almost got his head handed to him on a platter when he discussed, well, what about fees, right? The mindset is very much, the tax base is able to support these programs. We don't need to charge fees to our students, or we don't need to charge user fees to people who use the recreation department or the council on aging or youth and family services or board of health services, or whatever. We don't have to charge fees right now, right? So
That is
yeah.
that is a good situation.
Yeah.
I had mentioned this before, with regard to, I think I have a longer view of Burlington. Yeah, the growth has been terrific.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that in a very positive sense. I can remember my mother, when I mentioned to her that I was moving to Burlington, that we were going to build in Burlington, she called it the frontier at that time.
Yeah.
Where'd you
My
live where did
question
you
is,
where did you live at the time that you called it a frontier?
Malden, Medford.
Okay,
Yeah.
that you might have a point there.
Yeah, and this was there was nothing here really, or just about nothing at that time. I mean, there were a lot of people moving in just at that time. But I mean, as I look at, for example, the Hill, where 19 and a half is, there were two businesses there for a longest period. There was Kemp's Hamburger, I think I'd mentioned earlier. At any rate, you talk very nicely about Burlington's growth. I see a lot of new homes, big homes,
Mm-hmm.
great big homes, and I sense that some of the people who have been here in some of the smaller homes and maybe don't have quite the income are either moving out or moving into some kind of a settlement. And I have a little bit of concern about that. I want the town to grow. I want us to, but for example, yesterday I come down Skilton and there are 2 new homes going. There are two spots. They demolished one last night. Yesterday they demolished, and there's another big. I'm sure it's going to be a $100,000 home. I don't know where that's going. I don't know how it can be controlled. I don't know if it can be controlled.
$100,000 home, that would sell quite quickly.
Yeah.
100,000, yeah.
It probably will. In Burlington, it will.
I think probably meant more like $1 million.
$1 million, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I said 100,000.
Otherwise, I wanted
$1 million,
the
excuse
address.
me, yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
give me the realtor.
Yeah, well,
$1 million,
I'll do
yes,
that.
that would sell. As a matter of fact, yeah. But anyway,
So I don't. That's tough, right? Affordable housing is an issue in town right now as well, right? We don't have enough housing, particularly for either young people who want to move here, who are trying to buy their first home, all right?
Right.
Well, I'll say retirees who maybe don't want to stay in the house that they raised their family in because maybe it is bigger than what they need and more than they can afford now, right? We don't have a good stock of, I'll say, smaller, more affordable homes. That's one of Mike Runyon's major issues, as a matter of fact, and he's been working quite hard on. And we have a 40B, a so-called friendly 40B proposal that's ongoing right now to help address that issue, right? Well, somebody floated the idea to me of, well, what if we change the zoning bylaws to limit tear downs and rebuilds, and when I passed that along to a couple of others, that got shut down in a big hurry. And it's tough, right? How do you tell a homeowner, right, or a property owner that they can't do what they want with their property, right? And that's kind of what it comes down to, right? We have zoning. We can put some limits in place, reasonable limits, right? But to tell somebody that they can't put an addition on their house or they can't sell it and or build a bigger one, whatever it happens to be, that's a tough call, right?
Yeah.
To put those kind of limits on people's
where do
property.
you see Burlington in a few years? Oh, Larry, I'm sorry.
I think you want, yeah.
Go ahead, your
ahead.
turn.
I was thinking addition is one thing, but putting 2 more stories on that same house is a little different, that we could probably have some control over.
Well,
And I think Lexington just did that, if I'm correct.
yeah, we have height limits now, right? So I did an addition about 10 years ago, and the building inspector was very clear with the contractor that, because they were running into an issue of trying to join the addition to the existing roof, right? And the framer was talking about, I don't know the construction process very well, but doing something that was going to cause the peak of the addition to be higher than the peak of the existing roof. It's like, no, absolutely can't happen because we're already at the max. So we have such laws in effect now anyways. The maximum, I think, from grade to peak is 30 feet or something like that. So there's not much, which is a typical 2-story home, right? First floor, second floor, and the eaves.
At another town in Maine, that same concern came up that it was above the height limit. And so the developer measured it from the mound of dirt that he dug, the basement, from there to the top, say, see, I meet it.
Okay, yeah. Yep.
So when developers want to do something, I think they're very difficult people to stop.
Well, that's why we have zoning laws, right? So.
My turn.
Go ahead, yes. The light just came on.
No, I just lost my train of thought that I wanted to talk more about the issue of homes. But the other thing that is the traffic on 3A.
Okay.
What are the things, if any, that we can do with regard to the state, with regard to controlling the traffic or to making it easier, better? This came sharply into focus when we approved the Mercedes-Benz.
Sure. Yeah.
When they started talking about their carriers coming in and they would never be on the street that they were going to be going in. It made it crystal clear to me that what we have now is inadequate.
Yeah.
I don't know how we can control it or what we can do about it.
So the town has very little direct control, right? It's a state road, so the state has complete control
But
over
we
that.
can request.
We can request, and they will they will listen, right, and potentially make some reasonable accommodations. The biggest technical problem with that road is the fact that it isn't wide enough to legally have 2 lanes in each direction, right? I think it has to be 12 feet per lane, if I remember the numbers correctly, right? So if you wanted to have 2 lanes in each direction, you need 48 feet minimum, right?
Right.
And I guess and we don't have that all the way through. In order to do that, we would, the state would have to take land, right? That's expensive, difficult, everything else, and just, probably not tenable, right? Especially since most of it's commercial property. It's even more expensive than residential property, right?
I have a feeling that we could make it 3 lanes in each direction, and that road would still find a way to fill up. It would take from 93, it'd take from 3, which are also both overbooked.
Yeah.
So people are just looking for the easiest way these days.
I mean, my dream, would be that, and it's not just 3, it's also Wynn Street, right? So I live right off of Wynn Street, right off of Exit 34, right?
Yep,
It's the same problem,
especially with the schools,
right?
when school time.
And it's, a lot of it is through traffic, people getting to primarily, Burlington and Billerica, right? So you have Burlington residents and Billerica residents, going to the northern end of Burlington and on up to Billerica, right?
Yeah.
And there's no good way to get from that end of Burlington or Billerica to Route 128, right? It's 3A and Wynn Street are the only 2 ways to do it. If somehow there's some magical way to improve access to, say, Route 3, right? But even that backs up, right? But
It would be filled in immediately.
it would be filled up immediately, right? But that's classic. Anytime you add traffic capacity, traffic fills it in, right? That's always been the case.
Maybe
How-
if we
what
put
if they-
some tolls coming off the highway there, that
What
would
have they decided
discourage.
with regard to 19 and a half as an entrance and an exit onto? Do you know? Has that been?
I don't know. As far as I know, we're still not going to get a signal light there, and that is just basic state traffic guidelines, if you will. In terms of how close traffic lights can be to each other on a state road. Because we've got one at Bedford Street and we've got one at Wynn Street, right? And so there's really, under state traffic guidelines, there's really no room to put one in between. So I don't think there's a final solution there yet. But, there's been some talk about trying to use, brain cramp, the street that goes behind the fire station, between the town hall and the annex. Yeah.
Center Street?
Not Center Street. There's a street that goes between, it dead ends, right? There's actually a street in between town
I know
hall
what you
and
mean.
the
Oh,
annex.
I know what you mean, yeah.
And somehow emptying out there that has been discussed as well, but no viable solution yet. So for that,
So if I could get back to your personal future, do
Sure.
you plan to stay involved in town of Burlington politics?
eventually, I'm going to take some time off. Coming back to the personal reasons, right? There isn't a whole lot of time right now for other things. If anything, I'll probably get a little bit more involved in Boy Scouts and sports. That's where my 2 kids are spending their
that's
time
nice.
right now. So, that would be about the extent of it for some time. But I'm not retiring permanently. Whether it's town meeting or sitting on a committee or
The
whatever it happens to
phone
be.
will ring, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you. But
You're probably back in some capacity.
eventually, yeah. I will miss it. That I know.
You
for a
will
fact.
miss it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I will. There's no
Oh,
doubt about it.
sure.
So, I dragged my feet. I probably made this decision by Thanksgiving, right? And it took me until January before I finally, it's like, nothing's going to change my mind. There's that little thing in the back of my mind thinking maybe something's going to come along to convince me that I shouldn't, or convince me that I should run. But all along when I really knew I wasn't going to be running again. So.
You on tap? You okay? Are you?
Yeah, we go into a couple other things.
Sure.
I think we talked about some of your favorite times. Would you have a greatest achievement, or would you have any regrets that you'd like to discuss?
I actually, in terms of like policy and things that we did on the board, I actually don't have regrets. I'm actually very comfortable with all the decisions that we made along the way. But the one thing I wish I'd had more time to do is try and get more people involved. Right? When I first ran, I was actually quoting the father of a high school classmate of mine. Right? When we were in elementary school, he was on the so-called town council. It's the equivalent of the board of selectmen in the town I grew up in. Right? And he came and gave presentations in elementary school, and it was while we were studying civics, right, in elementary school and middle and junior high school. And I was like 5th or 6th grade, and even then I guess I was a politics geek or something, I don't know, but he made the point that local government, has more impact on your day-to-day life than state or federal government.
Yeah.
And because it impacts everything you do, especially if you're a kid, right, you're in school 5 days a week, right? And that always stuck with me. So I had always hoped to try and get more people involved in government, get more kids, get more young people involved in government, and do some of the talks that Mr. Gray had done, right? But that was one of the things I just didn't get to. Amy Warfield, the town clerk, and we had a lot of things that we talked about that we thought we'd like to get implemented. We were always talking about email policy and internet policy and things like that she and I never got to. So that
it's a pity that as a matter of fact, I was speaking to Amy too. She happens to be one of my neighbors, and I catch her when she's out with her little pooch, her little dog. She goes out for a walk, and I hit her up with anything that I can think of at the time. She was saying the same thing, that we're having difficulty getting people involved in government. So I think that's an admirable kind of thing to chase. I never realized. I'm still new at this, and despite the fact that I've been here for a long time, I just can't understand why more people. I know why I didn't. I was in business and schooling and whatnot, but I don't understand why more people don't get involved in government. I don't know what you can do other than to talk to individuals. Maybe there's a sense that Burlington is pretty well set, well taken care of. We don't have to worry about anything. That's a little bit of the sense that I get when I talk to people about anything that happens to come up when I'm visiting with someone. I don't know. I don't know what you can do. What you personally, it's good to have someone like you out there telling people.
Yeah, but I didn't do as much of it as I would have liked or had hoped, right?
Yeah.
And I think, for me, and I think this is true of a lot of people, they get involved when something comes up that is something
Personal.
Specific, personal concerns
Yeah.
them. For me, it was the memorial school, right?
Like Peach Orchard Road.
I'm sorry?
Peach Orchard Road, if you remember that. So a developer wanted to put in another exit from another.
Oh, right. Yeah, that gets people involved,
Yeah,
right?
but everybody comes out for that.
Yeah. Or, my friend Sharon, who got the whole thing going with the landlocked on the hunting, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. She was at town meeting at the last town meeting when town meeting voted on the open space zoning change. She was there and ready to speak if she got called on. So, yeah. So people do come out when there's something that they're directly interested in. So that helps. I'd like to see more people vote. Typical participation rate is like what 50,
too.
15% is considered good, right, for a local election.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
It seems also that nowadays all the committees are full. There's the precinct representation that's pretty well full. If not, if somebody leaves, then it gets filled immediately.
Yeah.
But there's nothing. Sign-ups for like Ways and Means that had about 7 or 8 different people over and above the people that were selected. So it looks like at this point people want to participate more.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah.
So I think you've done your job.
Well, maybe I messed things up and people are getting involved because I don't like the way things have gone. Who knows, right?
What do you think about Burlington in the future? Looking down the line, I mean, given the trajectory that we're on now, in terms of taxes, I'm thinking,
Sure.
are we going to be able to hold a line? Are we going to be able to literally, to hold a line, or is it just going to continue to go up and up and up?
Well, the cost of governing doesn't stay steady,
Yeah.
right? So I don't see a way to see that it will never go up, right? When you asked me about it earlier, right? I don't see any waste, all right? I think our departments do a good job of using the resources that they have. I don't see any excess there, to be honest with you. So, unless the cost of everything else starts going down, right? I don't instead of going up, I don't see a way for it to ebb.
Is anybody looking for ways to bring it down, to bring the cost of government down, or to at least hold the line?
I have to compliment John Sanchez in the Department of Public Works. They've done a lot of things over the years to try and keep costs down. Trash collection's a good example, right? The notion that we have collection once a week, right? That's because we're part of a regional municipal agreement, right?
Right.
That saves us a little bit of money, right? Because the company that's doing it, all right, doesn't have to have as many truck rolls, 5 days a week, right? So it saved them a little bit of money. So a little bit of those savings get passed along to us. We're getting money for our recyclables that we didn't used to get. So there are little things like that we're trying to do. But the problem is most of the budget, like 80–90%, is personnel, right? So unless you start cutting people, there's really no way to make really big changes in the expenses, right?
I don't know if that's the case because we continue to add 5 to 10 new employees every year. So just stop growing the government.
Right, which is...
And I'll bet we could achieve it.
Yeah.
At least a level budget.
At least this year we're not. I know we're not adding anybody this year.
I thought we were adding the fire.
Other than what was previously planned, I should say. You're right. We are adding fire, right? But that was a case of the fire department being understaffed to begin with. So, we frequently weren't able to fill out shifts. So, police was understaffed. I think we're at full hire now, but we had 2 or 3 positions in the police that were unfilled for a while. So,
can I quote you when you say that John Sanchez has done a real good job? We anticipate him being on the show, perhaps the next show. I don't know, but in the near future. Can
absolutely.
I quote you?
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
And okay, that he really makes an effort to.
And he's got a good team. Tom Hayes, the town engineer. Coming back to things that you thought you'd never know about, paving of all things, right? And how he's changed the way we manage pavement around town. To get more bang for the buck, right? To make sure that we're spending the money on paving in a way that makes the paving last longer. I mean, it's just things like that, right?
All important things, very, very important.
So since we have an election coming up, what would your recommendation be to anyone seeking your position?
Anybody in particular?
No.
So,
any person, him or her.
Yeah. When the very first townwide election I got involved in was the debt exclusion to try and fund the memorial school back in 2003, I think it was, right? And we got beaten pretty badly. The debt exclusion lost roughly 60% to 40%, right? And boy, did we go about it all wrong, right? We were, letters to the editors, yard signs, all those things, right? When I ran for selectman, it was just get out and meet people and ask for their vote, right? And that's the thing you got to do. You got to knock on doors, right? One of the things that helped me was being a relative newcomer at the time I ran was that there were some people who had been here for a long time who were willing to help me and introduce me to people, right? So you need that if you don't know a lot of people. But it's all about
a lot of personal contact.
It's all about personal contact.
Got to be willing to do that. Is what you're saying.
Right. You got to be willing to ask people for their vote. Yep. That's simple. Yep.
And a good pair of shoes.
And given the time of year, a good pair of gloves and a hat because you do a lot of it in melting snow.
What are you going to do with all your extra time? You mentioned a couple of possibilities. Are you I mean, you're still going to be pretty busy.
I'm still going to be very busy. That's the thing. I don't have a lot of extra time,
Yeah.
and this isn't. Yeah, so things aren't going to change much, other than, oh, when I have to help one of the kids with their homework or get them someplace, I will be there to do it, and not, have to be running off to a selectmen's meeting or a subcommittee meeting or something, right? So it's that, or maybe spend an extra hour at work and get that one more bug fixed or something before I do go home, whatever it happens to be, right? So that's where it's going to be for the next few years. Yeah.
How does your wife feel about you?
She was relieved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Relieved.
Yeah.
Sure.
She's been very supportive, but at the same time, relieved that this is going to be one thing that's not going to.
Now you can be home to do that extra thing that you were avoiding
Yeah.
all of that time.
Yep. Something like that. Yeah.
Your work is, you said you were in Woburn, is where you're located?
Yeah. I'm a software
So
engineer.
That's well, I mean, the fact that it's next door is a big help, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, that's a huge
Travel
help.
alone is.
It's funny. My previous job actually worked in Burlington, over in the Sun campus, as we like to call it, even though Sun hasn't been around for years, right? But my commute to Woburn is actually shorter than it was there. I work in a little office building right behind Woburn Mall. But it's interesting tie-in. The company I work for, Gridco Systems, is making equipment that helps the utilities manage the electricity on the line, on the residential line, right? And it all comes about because of the increase in solar panels on people's roofs and electric vehicle chargers in their garages, right? And so some of what we're dealing with is regulations and the idea of helping the utilities meet these regulatory requirements of buying back the solar power, meeting power quality requirements, and all the same issues that the town of Burlington itself, the municipality deals with, right? You remember a year or two ago we were trying to get solar panels.
Yep.
In a deal, right? It's the
work
same
out?
thing. Not as well as we would have liked. We're moving ahead. I should say the schools are moving ahead with their program, because the developer is able to work with the schools, because the schools are going to put the panels on their own property, right? On the municipal side, the general government side, we didn't have our own locations where we were going to put the panels, so we were working with a third party, other real estate, private entities, to place the panels, and they were going to charge rent. We were going to get a reduction in our rate, and the solar panel company was going to, sell the power, right? But the sites where we were going to put the panels backed out, right? The private commercial sites backed out. So we don't really have any municipal property where we can put the panels. So it hasn't really worked out as we had hoped on the
Is this
municipal
part of your
side.
schooling? Is this connected with your schooling?
Kind of. I do software, but my education was actually in electrical engineering, right? So it's been a long time since I've done a lot of this particular math, but it
You
kinda makes
don't
sense.
know how long it's been, believe me.
Oh,
Talk about long.
yeah.
Okay, Larry, I think you anything you want to say? We're getting
Oh,
close to.
It looks like all my questions have been answered, except we could just go back to the question of resources
Sure.
and water resources in particular.
Okay.
But seeing that John Sanchez has announced we have a water shortage,
Yeah.
do you think we should still continue to go full force forward with more development? Or should there be some sort of pause until we figure something out?
So it would be nice if we could do that, but coming back to my statement earlier, right? You've got property owners who, by right, can develop their property, right? We don't have any. It's not like there's all this property sitting around that's waiting for somebody to decide what to do with or rezone to commercial to be developed, right? So the best we can do is. The best we can do would be to limit any development within the rights, the existing rights of the property owner, right? But those rights are pretty broad. I mean, that's part of the problem here, right?
Do you see anything coming to alleviate the water issue?
We are investigating actually tying into the MWRA water supply, as a matter of fact, yeah. Right now, their water rates are actually competitive. Unlike when they first, was it maybe 20 years ago or so, Deer Island, right, and the whole new treatment plant, everybody who was on MWRA, their rates were going through the roof because of the, more because of the sewer problems than the water problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
But right now, MWRA actually has, they're producing more water than they can sell. So right now their rates are good.
How do we stand with regard to water currently, given the snow and everything?
Yeah, officially we're still under a ban, right? We actually officially haven't lifted the ban. I haven't gotten a report from John recently, but when was the last time I was out by the reservoir? I think it was before, it must have been in the fall. It was still pretty low.
It was down.
Yeah. Now, the reservoir actually isn't our primary supply. Our primary supply is actually the aquifer, right? Off of Terrace Hall and, Middlesex Turnpike and all that. But we have a couple of wells that aren't functioning right now. They're not functioning. We can't use them because of contamination. So that also limits our supply. Or it limits our ability to produce. The water's there, but we can't get it out as easily as we need to be able to because we can't use all of our pumping stations.
I think we should have John Sanchez next month, ask him some of these questions.
John, yeah, I am. As a matter of fact, I'm putting them in the head, yeah. The first thing I want to say is that Dan said that you were doing a terrific job with regard to trying to save money for the town. I think that'll put us in good stead with John. We've only got a little time left. I just want to say thank you very much. I've known you from a distance, and now I'm very happy that I've had a chance to.
Well, thank you.
It's been kind of business, and I'm hoping the time will come when we can share a glass of wine or a cup of beer or whatever.
Yeah.
And I wish you well on what your plans are for the future. I'm sure they will miss you. I know they will, and we'll miss you too.
I appreciate
as
that.
a
Thank you.
selectman.
Thank
But
you.
we expect to see you around town.
Any last thoughts on what you would encourage the town government to do or work on or be better at or cognizant of? What's your recommendation?
My recommendation, boy, I think in just very broad terms, just be mindful that, like I said, we've been given a gift. We have this legacy of
Take care of it.
a well-planned town and just try and continue to manage it well, right? Take care of it. And also get more people involved in local government.
Yeah.
There we go.
That we will work on. Folks out there, I just wanted to say that we're going to have some terrific guests coming up following Dan. John Sanchez is going to be joining us. I think, I don't know exactly when, Kevin Duffy from 19 and a Half is going to be joining us. Kristen Kastner on the master plan, I hope will be joining us. And some other people that we have in mind. So join in and tune in to us as often as you can. And with that, I'll say good night and thank you. And once again, Dan, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.